Dim the lights and let the world fall away. You're entering DreadLoop, Creepypasta, where the silence feels heavier, and every story pulls you deeper into the dark. If you enjoy these dark stories, subscribe, and return when the night feels longest. Now settle and breathe slowly, and listen closely. Tonight's tale begins now. The apartment came to me through a woman I barely knew, which is maybe why I said yes to it. Her name was Priya. We had worked together, briefly, at a translation agency in Lisbon about 4 years earlier, back when I was still telling myself that freelancing in Europe was a career rather than a slow-motion financial collapse. She was Indian-British, and I was American, and we had been the only two native English speakers on a staff of 20, which gave us something that felt like friendship for 11 months. And then, after I moved to Berlin and she moved to Amsterdam, dissolved into the quiet maintenance of liking each other's occasional photos. She messaged me on a Tuesday in October. I was in a sublet in New Cologne that smelled like the last tenant's cigarettes, behind on a book translation and ignoring emails from a dentist about a crown I couldn't afford. The message said, "Weird question, are you in Berlin right now, my aunt has a flat in your area. She needs someone to stay in. She pay. It's complicated, but not weird. Call me." I called her. She was on a train somewhere between Rotterdam and Utrecht, and the signal came and went, and the gist of what she told me was this. Her aunt, who was her mother's older sister, owned a flat in Schöneberg. The aunt lived in London now and had not been to Berlin in almost 6 years since her husband died. The flat had been sitting empty, which was legally problematic in the building, because the co-op required units to be occupied most of the year. The aunt had been paying a cleaner to come once a month and turn the lights on and off. Now the cleaner had quit. The co-op was making noise. The aunt, Priya said, needed a person to live in the flat through the winter, at least until March, and she'd pay €800 a month on top of the utilities being free. I was paying $650 for the New Cologne sublet. The math did itself. I said, "What's the catch?" Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The catch is my aunt is specific, and the last person who stayed there left in the middle of the night." I said, "What do you mean left?" She said, "I mean he packed a bag at 3 in the morning and got on a train to Hamburg and called my aunt from the platform and told her he wasn't coming back. He wouldn't say why. He refused to go back for his things. My aunt had to have them shipped to him in England. That was 2 years ago. The cleaner came once a month after that, and then she quit 6 weeks ago." I said, "Why did the cleaner quit?" Priya said, "I don't know. I don't think my aunt knows, really. She said something about the teapot. Look, my aunt isn't crazy. The flat is beautiful. Most of the people who've stayed there have been fine. But I am going to be honest with you because we are friends and because I want you to know what you're walking into. It's an old flat and it has its moods. If you can live with that, it's the best deal you'll find in Berlin this winter." I said I'd think about it. 2 hours later, I had an email from a woman named Mrs. Banerjee, written in very formal English, thanking me for my interest in outlining the terms. The rent arrangement was as Priya had described. The flat was furnished. I was welcome to use everything in it. She asked only 3 things of me. She asked that I not move the furniture. She asked that I water the plants on the balcony twice a week. And she asked that I follow a short daily routine, which she said she would explain when I arrived, and which she hoped I would take seriously because it had been important to her husband. I wrote back and said the terms were acceptable. I moved in on a Saturday in late October. Berlin was already cold. The trees along Akasienstraße had turned the color of weak tea, and the light in the afternoon was the specific low-angled gold that northern European cities get, for about 3 weeks before the gray sets in for 5 months. The building was a pre-war tenement with a courtyard, the kind of building where you had to press a button inside the entry hall to make the lights turn on for 30 seconds at a time. The flat was on the 4th floor, no elevator. I carried my 2 suitcases up the stairs, and I sweated through my jacket, and I thought, this is going to be fine. This is going to be fine. Mrs. Banerjee had sent a woman from the building, a neighbor, named Frau Kahler, to let me in, hand me the keys. Frau Kahler was in her 60s, severe, polite, German in the way Germans in that generation are German, which is to say direct without being unkind. She opened the door and let me walk. First, she watched me while I looked at the flat. I think she was checking to see what I'd notice. The flat was small and beautiful. 2 rooms and a kitchen and a bathroom. The floors were the original wood, dark with age, waxed recently. The walls had been painted a soft off-white. There was a living room with a green velvet couch and 2 armchairs and a bookshelf that covered an entire wall, packed with books in English and Bengali and German. There was a small dining table under the window, a brass reading lamp on a side table, a Persian rug in a pattern of deep reds and blues. The bedroom had a double bed with a blue quilt, a wardrobe and a desk. The kitchen was narrow and well used. Everything was clean. Everything was slightly too quiet in the way that flats that have not been lived in for a while are quiet, as if the air itself had settled. Before Frau Kahler left, she paused in the doorway. She said, "The young man before you, he was a nice boy. I hope you are careful." Then she handed me the keys and went. I stood in the hallway for a minute, thinking about that, and then I told myself she was old, and that old people in old buildings said things like that, and I went to unpack. On the dining table, there was a folded piece of paper with my name, written on it in a careful hand. I made tea in the kitchen, which took longer than it should have because I couldn't figure out which of the knobs on the gas stove corresponded to which burner. And I sat at the dining table and I opened the letter. It was handwritten, in blue ink, on a heavy cream paper. The handwriting was lovely. It started, "Dear Mr. Harlan, thank you for agreeing to stay in our flat. I want to explain the routine I mentioned, because it is important, and because I do not want you to think I am unkind for insisting on it. My husband, Arun, had a habit. He was a quiet man and a careful one, and when we bought this flat in 1994, he began a practice that he continued until his death in 2018. He believed that a home that is lived in remembers being lived in, and that a home that is empty begins to forget. He believed that the small gestures of occupancy, the lights turning on in the evening, the kettle in the morning, the window being opened to change the air, were a kind of conversation with the space, and that the space needed to hear them regularly to stay well. When he was alive, he kept a small notebook by the door, and each evening before bed, he would make 3 entries. What he had done that day to make the flat feel occupied, what he had noticed about the flat that day, and what he intended to do the following day. It was a small discipline. I found it charming when he was alive, and I have found it necessary since he died. You will find the notebook by the front door, on the small shelf beneath the mirror. Please write in it each night before you sleep. You do not need to write much. A sentence for each entry is enough. In addition, Arun left instructions for the daily maintenance of the flat, a set of small practices that he considered essential. There are 7 of them. They are on the page following this letter. Please follow them as written. Please do not improvise, add to them, or subtract from them. I must be honest with you about one thing. The practices will sometimes seem to stop working. A window that opened yesterday will not open today. A lamp that turned on last week will not turn on this week. When this happens, please do not force anything. Please call me. Arun understood what was happening, and I do, a little, but it requires explaining in person, and I do not want to frighten you in writing. The young man who stayed here before you did not call me when things began to change. I wish he had. I would have explained. Please take care of the flat, and it will take care of you. With warm regards, Asha Banerjee. I turned the page. The 7 practices were written in the same hand, numbered, with a short explanation next to each dot. In the morning, open the kitchen window for 10 minutes. In the afternoon, boil the kettle at least once. In the evening, turn on the brass reading lamp in the living room before any other light. Close the bedroom door when you sleep. If the hallway light flickers, do not use the hallway until it has stopped. Do not touch the small brown teapot on the top shelf of the kitchen for any reason. And write in the notebook every night before bed. At the bottom of the page, in slightly smaller handwriting, Mrs. Banerjee had added, Arun used to say, the flat will tell you if something is wrong. You only have to notice. I read the list 3 times. I drank my tea. I thought for €800 a month plus free utilities, I can boil a kettle and write in a notebook and leave a teapot alone. These were easy things. I went to the front door. There was a shelf beneath the mirror, as she had said. On it was a small leather-bound notebook, worn at the edges. I picked it up and opened it. The first entry was dated May 3, 1994. Arun's handwriting was narrow and neat, in black ink. He had written, Today I put the books on the shelf. I noticed the afternoon light on the wall above the couch. Tomorrow I will buy a lamp for the corner. I turned the pages slowly. The entries went on. Day after day, year after year. He wrote about which window he opened, what he cooked, which neighbor he had met on the stairs. He was a man, I could tell, who had loved this flat with a steady and unspectacular attention. The entries continued until June 14, 2018. After that, the handwriting changed. Mrs. Banerjee's hand took over for a few pages, then stopped. Then a new hand appeared, blockier, in blue pen. The entries were from 2022. The writer identified himself in the first line. My name is Matthias. I am staying here until February. I read his entries. They started the way mine would start. Arrived today. Notice the light in the bedroom. Tomorrow, I will buy groceries. They went on calm and domestic for about 3 weeks. Then they changed. On November 19, 2022, he wrote, Window and kitchen will not open today. I forced it. It opened, but the wood cracked. On November 21st, kettle boiled, but made no sound. I don't know if I should call Mrs. Banerjee. She said to call if things change. But it's only a kettle. On November 24th, lamp in living room will not turn on, bulb is fine. I gave up and turned on the overhead. The flat feels different with the overhead on, colder. On November 27th, bedroom door was open when I woke. I had closed it. I am sure, on November 28th, I am writing this in the afternoon because I cannot sleep. The teapot on the top shelf moved last night. It was still on the top shelf when I checked. But the jars in front of it were in a different order. I did not touch it. I want to make that clear. I did not touch it. On November 29th, I think something followed me from the kitchen to the bedroom last night. I did not see it. I heard the floor. On November 30th, I am calling Mrs. Banerjee in the morning. On December 1st, I did not call her. I was going to. The teapot is on the kitchen counter this morning. I did not move it. I want to make that clear for anyone who reads this. I did not move the teapot. There was one more entry written in a shakier version of the same hand. The date was December 2nd, 2022. It said, it was in the bedroom tonight. I don't know how. I closed the door. I am leaving in the morning. I am sorry for the notebook. I am sorry for the flat. Please tell her I am sorry. I cannot stay. After that entry, the pages were empty until the cleaner's handwriting started in January of 2023. Her entries were short and flat and went on for about a year. Lights on, lights off, opened window, watered plants, kettle boiled. The last one was from 2 weeks before I arrived. It said, I am not coming back. I am sorry. Please find someone else. I sat on the couch with the notebook open in my lap for a long time. Then I got up and I closed it. I put it back on the shelf under the mirror. I stood in the hallway, looking toward the kitchen. I could see, from where I was standing, the top corner of the top shelf, where a small dark shape sat behind a row of glass jars. I did not go into the kitchen for an hour. When I finally did, I did not look at the shelf. I made another cup of tea. I told myself that Matthias had been suggestible. I told myself that old flats were strange, and that strange old flats attracted strange old stories, and that 800 euros a month was 800 euros a month, and that I was not a man who spooked easily. I did everything the list told me to do that first night. I did not improvise. I did not touch anything I was not supposed to touch. I opened the window for 10 minutes even though it was evening and the rule said morning. And I told myself I'd do it properly tomorrow. I boiled the kettle. I turned on the brass lamp before any other light. I closed the bedroom door firmly. When I went to sleep, I wrote in the notebook. I wrote, "Arrived today. Notice the light on the floor in the bedroom is the color of honey. Tomorrow I will buy groceries." I slept lightly. I did not dream. The flat made no sound all night. I want to tell you about the first 2 weeks because they were good and because I want you to understand that I was not frightened when I lived there. I was not a person waiting for something to go wrong. The flat was beautiful. I did my translation work at the dining table in the mornings. I walked to the market on Winterfeldplatz. On Saturdays, I read in the evenings on the green couch under the brass lamp. I called my sister in Denver once a week. I did not drink alone, which had become a habit in New Cologne, and I did not notice that I'd stopped until the second Sunday, when I realized I hadn't had a glass of wine in 9 days and I didn't want one. The rules became routine quickly. I opened the window in the morning when the kettle was boiling. I turned on the brass lamp at dusk. I closed the bedroom door when I slept. I did not touch the brown teapot on the top shelf, which I looked at sometimes while I was cooking, because it was the only object in the flat that felt older than the rest of the flat, the only thing that had a patina you couldn't fake. It was a small dark earthenware thing, the color of wet bark, with a chip on the lid. I never reached for it. I never even let myself linger on it. The hallway light never flickered. I wrote in the notebook every night before bed. My entries got longer as the days passed. I started to enjoy the ritual. I wrote about the translation I was working on, and about the bakery on the corner where the woman behind the counter had begun to nod at me, and about the way the radiator in the living room clicked at 6 every evening. I wrote about a crow I kept seeing on the balcony railing. I want to say that I was happy in the flat. Those first 2 weeks are important, because they give the rest of what I am about to tell you the right shape. I was not a haunted person. I was a settled one. The first change came on a Thursday. The second Thursday I was there, I made my morning coffee. I went to the kitchen window. I opened it. The window did not open the way it had opened the morning before. The latch moved, the way it always moved, but when I pushed the window outward, it caught on something. I pushed harder. It gave, reluctantly. Cold air came in. I stood at the window for 10 minutes, the way I always did, and then I closed it. That was all. The window had been stiff. I thought about Matthias forcing his window and cracking the wood. I told myself I was not Matthias. That night I wrote in the notebook. I wrote about the window being stiff. I wrote it as an observation, the way Arun had written his observations. In the morning, I opened the window again, and it moved easily. Fine. Whatever had caught it had given. On Saturday, the kettle would not whistle. The kettle was an electric one, and I want to be accurate. It did not refuse to boil. It boiled. I saw the water reach a rolling boil through the little window on the side. But the whistle, which was mechanical and depended on the lid being seated in a particular way, did not sound. I checked the lid. It was on correctly. I poured the water out and started over. Same thing. Boiled, no whistle. I remembered Matthias writing. Kettle boiled, but made no sound. I don't know if I should call Mrs. Banerjee. I used the kettle anyway. I wrote about it in the notebook. I wrote, "The kettle boiled but did not whistle today." I did not call her yet. I wanted to see. I wanted to understand before I asked. On the Monday of my 3rd week, I came back from the market in the afternoon. I turned on the brass lamp in the living room before I turned on any other light. I went into the kitchen to unpack the groceries. I came back to the living room, and the lamp was off. I stood in the doorway, looking at it. I turned it on again. I watched it. The bulb was steady. The light was warm. I went back into the kitchen. I came back 5 minutes later. The lamp was on. I had not turned it on that second time. I had turned it on once, watched it turn off, turned it on again, gone into the kitchen, come back, and found it on. That was 3 states of being on and off, and I had only authored 2 of them. I sat on the couch. I looked at the lamp. I did not touch it. I waited to see if it would change again. It did not. It stayed on until I went to bed. I wrote about it in the notebook. I wrote, "The lamp turned itself off today, and then on." I did not touch it the second time. I don't know what this means. The next day, in the afternoon, I noticed the furniture. The green couch was maybe 2 inches closer to the wall than it had been that morning. The brass lamp on the side table was slightly angled differently, so that the shade pointed more toward the couch than it had before. The Persian rug was straight. The bookshelf was untouched. I stood in the doorway of the living room, and I looked at the couch for a long time. I had not moved it. I had been careful not to move the furniture. Mrs. Banerjee had been specific about that. But 2 inches is 2 inches, and I could not prove, even to myself, that I remembered the exact position of the couch. Maybe it had always been there. Maybe I had been wrong about where it was. I wrote in the notebook. I wrote, "The couch looks different today." I cannot tell if I am remembering it wrong. I did not call Mrs. Banerjee. On Wednesday, the bedroom door. I had closed it the night before. I was sure of this because I had closed it every night for 3 weeks, and closing it had become the last thing I did before I turned off the bedside lamp. It was a habit so firm, it was almost physical. I woke at about 4 in the morning because I had to use the bathroom. The bedroom door was open, not ajar. Open. All the way open, pressed back against the wall of the bedroom, as if someone had pushed it open hard enough to make it swing wide and rest there. I sat up in bed. I looked at the door. The hallway beyond it was dark. I listened. The flat was completely silent. There was no wind. There was no sound of anyone moving. I got up. I walked to the bathroom, and I used it, and I came back. I closed the bedroom door. I pressed it all the way shut, and I listened to the click of the latch. I got back in bed. I did not sleep again until the sky started to lighten. In the morning, I read my note from the night before. I had written, "Tonight I closed the bedroom door carefully. I am always careful about the bedroom door. Tomorrow I will remember that I was careful about it." I had not written that. I had no memory of writing that. My own handwriting, my own pen, my own ink, but the words were not words I remembered putting down. The entry before it, 2 lines up, said, "Read another chapter of the Asenos tonight. The translation is going well." I remembered writing that. I remembered the feel of the pen as I wrote it, but the line about the bedroom door was not something I had written. I would have remembered. I sat at the dining table with the notebook open for a long time. I drank my coffee. I thought about calling Mrs. Banerjee. I still did not call her. That was my mistake. I want to be clear about that, because Matthias had made the same mistake. He had not called her until it was too late to call her, and I was, in that moment, sitting in the same chair and looking at the same notebook and making the same decision. I told myself I would wait until something more definite happened. On Thursday, something more definite happened. I went to open the kitchen window in the morning, and I could not open it. The latch moved. The window did not. It was not stiff. It was locked somehow from the inside, though it had no interior lock. I pushed it. I pulled it. I tried to unstick it. It would not move. I stood at the kitchen counter, with the kettle boiling behind me, and I thought about Matthias forcing his window open and cracking the wood. I did not force it. I left the window closed. I called Mrs. Banerjee. It was about 9 in the morning in Berlin, 8 in London. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was softer than I had expected. She said my name before I said anything, which meant she had saved my number. I said, Mrs. Banerjee, I am very sorry to bother you, but the kitchen window won't open this morning. I can't open it. I have tried. I don't want to force it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, thank you for calling. You did right to call. Tell me about the last few days, I told her. The stiff window the previous week, the kettle that did not whistle, the lamp that turned itself off and on, the couch that had moved 2 inches, the bedroom door, the handwriting that I didn't remember producing. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Mr. Harlan, I am going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Have you touched the teapot? I said no. Of course not. She said, have you looked at it? I said, I have seen it on the shelf. I haven't moved it. I haven't reached for it. She said, has it moved? I said no. It's still on the shelf. She said, thank God. I said, Mrs. Banerjee, what is happening? Please tell me plainly. I read Matthias's entries. I know something happened. To him, I need to understand. She took a breath. Then she said, Mr. Harlan, I am going to explain what Arun understood about the flat, because you have earned it by calling when you did. The rules change. One of them changes each night. You will not know which one. The kettle may need to boil twice instead of once. The lamp may need to be turned off instead of on. The window may need to stay closed for a day. The bedroom door may need to be left open. She said, Arun kept track of these changes in the notebook. The notebook is not only a record. It is how you notice. You read what you did the day before, and you notice what the flat did in response, and you adjust the following day accordingly. He said it was like a conversation. I said, why does the flat want me to adjust? She said, I don't know. I have never known. Arun thought it was the nature of old buildings. He thought the flat had become something over the years, something that paid attention back. He thought that as long as we paid attention to, it was a good companion. He said it was the most honest place he had ever lived. I said, what happens if I don't adjust? What happened to Matthias? She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, Matthias forced the window when it wanted to be closed. He used the overhead light when the brass lamp wanted to be on. He left the bedroom door open when it wanted to be closed. He thought he was following the rules, because the rules on the page had not changed, but the flat had changed, and he could not hear the change. He did not call me. I did not know, I said, and then, she said, and then the teapot moved. I think you read that entry. The teapot moved onto the counter. I said yes. She said, the teapot moves when the flat is frightened. Arun said it only ever happened twice while he was alive. Once in 1998, when there was a fire in the building below us, and once in 2001, when I had pneumonia and did not know it yet. He said the teapot knew before we did. He said, if it is ever on the floor, we should call him immediately. He did not explain why. She said, Matthias wrote that the teapot was on the counter. He did not call me. The next night he wrote that something had followed him from the kitchen to the bedroom, and that the teapot had moved to the bedroom. I do not know what he meant. He would not tell me when I finally reached him, weeks later, in England. He said only that he had opened the bedroom door in the middle of the night, and that what he had seen in the hallway had made him pack a bag and leave within the hour. She said, he told me, Mrs. Banerjee, I do not want to know what your husband made an arrangement with, but I think he made one. And I do not think it is gentle to strangers, she said, Mr. Harlan. I did not tell you this before because I did not want to frighten you, and because for most of the 30 years Arun and I lived there, the flat was kind. It was a good home. It looked after us. But I believe that it needs to be listened to, and that when it is not listened to, it becomes frightened, and that when it is frightened, it is no longer kind. I believe Arun knew this. I believe he never told me how he knew. She said, "You are listening. You called. You did not force the window. You will be fine." I said, "What do I do today?" She said, "Leave the window closed. Boil the kettle twice. Whatever other small changes you notice, follow them. Sit in the living room tonight with the brass lamp on. Write in the notebook. Tomorrow the rules will shift again. You will learn the pattern." Arun learned it in the first winter, I said, "and the teapot." She said, "Do not touch it. Do not approach it. If it moves, call me immediately." Immediately, Mr. Harlan. Not in the morning. Not in an hour. Immediately. I said, "I understand." She said, "I believe you do. Thank you for calling. Please call any time." I spent the rest of that day listening to the flat. I left the window closed. I boiled the kettle twice. In the evening, I noticed that the brass lamp, when I tried to turn it on at dusk, would not light. I did not force it. I left it off. I read by the overhead light, which I had not used before, and which made the room feel colder and more clinical, and I went to bed earlier than usual. On Friday, the bedroom door stood open when I went to bed. I had closed it. I knew I had closed it, but when I came back from the bathroom to climb under the covers, it was open. I left it open. I slept poorly, but I slept. I dreamed about Matthias, although I had never seen his face. In the dream, he was standing in the hallway of the flat looking at me with the bedroom door open between us, and he was shaking his head, and he was trying to tell me something, and I could not hear him. I woke at 6. The door was still open. The hallway was gray with early morning light. I got out of bed. I walked down the hallway to the kitchen to start the kettle. As I passed the kitchen doorway, I saw the teapot. It was on the counter, not on the floor. On the counter. In the middle of the counter, next to the stove, the handle out, the chip of the lid facing the doorway. Exactly the way Matthias had described it in his notebook. I stopped in the hallway. I did not go into the kitchen. I walked back to the bedroom. I picked up my phone. I called Mrs. Banerjee. It was 6 in the morning in Berlin, 5 in London. She answered on the first ring, which told me she had been sleeping with her phone next to her, which told me she had been waiting for this call, perhaps for years. I said, "Mrs. Banerjee, the teapot is on the counter." She said, "Not on the floor." I said, "No." "On the counter." She said, "Handle out." I said, "Yes." She said, "The chip of the lid facing you." I said, "Yes." She said, "Mr. Harlan, listen to me. I want you to pack a small bag. Enough for one night. Take your passport, your wallet, your phone charger. Take nothing else. Leave the flat within the hour. Go to a hotel, anywhere, I will pay. Do not come back until I tell you it is safe." I said, "What is happening?" She said, "The flat is frightened." I do not know of what. I do not want to find out. Arun used to say, if the teapot is on the counter, the flat is warning you. If the teapot moves again, it is no longer warning you. It is telling you it cannot help you anymore. I said, "Where does it move next?" She said, "To the floor. And after that, into the other rooms." Matthias wrote that it moved to his bedroom on his last night. I do not know how. I have never seen it move. But I know that Arun, the one time the teapot moved in his presence, in 2001, picked it up and put it back on the shelf and sat with it for an hour. I know because he wrote about it. He wrote, "I sat with the teapot tonight and I told it everything was going to be all right." I do not know who he thought he was talking to. I said, "Should I put it back. She said no. Not this time. You are not Arun. You do not have 30 years of knowing this flat. Matthias put his back, and the next night it was in his bedroom. I want you out of the flat before that can happen. I said, I will go. She said, thank you. Call me when you are at the hotel. Call me every hour until you are somewhere safe. I packed a bag in 5 minutes. I did not look at the kitchen. I did not look at the teapot. I walked out of the flat with my suitcase in one hand and my bag in the other, and I locked the door behind me. Though I knew already that a lock was not what the flat would answer to, I went down the 4 flights of stairs. The automatic hallway. Light kept turning off as I descended, the way it always did, the way it had been doing every time I climbed the stairs for 3.5 months. I pressed the button on each landing to make it come on again. On the 2nd floor I stopped. The door of 2B was open. 2B was the apartment of the old woman Frau Kahler had mentioned to me once, in passing, when I had been carrying groceries up the stairs in November. She had said the woman in 2B was in her 80s, lived alone, had been in the building for 50 years. I had never seen her. I had heard her TV through the door sometimes. The door was open, maybe 6 inches. The hallway light was on inside. I could see a slice of a foyer, a coat on a hook, a pair of slippers by the wall. I stood on the landing. I looked at the open door. Something in me said, walk past. Something else in me, something older and less sensible, said, knock. I knocked. There was no answer. I pushed the door open a little more. I said, hello, in German, which was the only German I was any good at. Hello. Is anyone home? No answer. I stepped into the foyer. I don't know why. I was not a person who stepped into strangers' apartments. But the door was open, and the hallway light was on, and I was thinking about the teapot, and I was not in my right mind, and I stepped in. The foyer opened into a living room. There was a small woman sitting in an armchair with a book open on her lap. She was facing the window. Her back was to me. The book in her lap was a paperback with a green cover. The light from the window was the gray light of 6 in the morning. I said, hello, again, very softly. She did not answer. I walked around the chair so I could see her face. She was not alive. She had not been alive for some time. I don't know how to describe what I saw in a way that will not be distressing, so I will only say that she had been dead long enough that the distinction between person and object had begun, quietly, to assert itself, and that her hands on the book were very still. I stood in her living room for a moment. Then I walked out. I pulled the door mostly shut behind me, because I did not want to leave it open, but I did not want to close it all the way either, because I was going to need to tell someone, and I did not want to be a person who had closed a door on a dead woman. I walked down the last 2 flights. I went outside into the courtyard. I walked through the archway to the street. I stood on the sidewalk in the cold morning air with my suitcase and my bag, and I called Mrs. Banerjee back, and when she picked up, I did not tell her right away about 2B, because I did not yet know how to say it. I told her I was outside the building. I told her I was going to a hotel. I told her I would call her when I got there. She said, thank you, Mr. Harlan. Then I went to the police, and I told them about 2B, and the rest of that day was spent in a small room at a police station in Schneeberg, drinking bad coffee and answering questions about why I had gone into the apartment of a woman I had never met. And I did not mention the teapot, and I did not mention the flat upstairs, and I did not mention Mrs. Banerjee. And by evening I was at a hotel near Zuligischer Garten, with my suitcase at the foot of the bed and the TV on for the human voices. Police determined later that the woman in 2B had died in her chair sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning that day. She had been reading. The book had still been open on her lap. Her daughter, when they reached her, said that her mother had spoken to her the previous afternoon and had seemed fine, although tired, and had mentioned that she had been hearing footsteps from the apartment above for the last few nights and had not been sleeping well. 2B was 2 floors below me. The apartment directly above 2B was empty, had been empty for years, the owners having moved to Spain. The apartment above that was mine. The footsteps she had been hearing had been in the empty apartment. Or in mine, or somewhere between. I called Mrs. Banerjee that night from the hotel. I told her about 2B. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I think that is what the flat was frightened of. I think it knew. I said, knew what? She said, I don't know. I don't want to know. I think something was in the building. I think your flat could feel it. I think the teapot moved because the flat wanted to warn you, and the flat wanted to warn her, and the flat could not reach her, and it was asking you to do something, and you did. You came down the stairs, you found her. You told someone, I said. She was already dead. She said yes. But she is not alone anymore. The flat, I think, did not want her to be alone. She said, Mr. Harlan, I do not think you should come back. I will send someone to collect your things. I will pay you for the full winter as agreed. I do not want you to go back into that flat. I want you to understand that this is not because you did anything wrong. You did everything right. You called. You listened. You went down the stairs. But I think the flat has been asked too much this winter, and I do not think it is safe anymore, for anyone, until I can come to Berlin myself. I said, can I ask you one thing? She said yes. I said, the teapot. Where is it now? She said, I called Frau Kahler an hour ago. I asked her to check the flat. I told her not to go past the front door. I asked her to look down the hallway. I said, and Mrs. Banerjee said, the teapot was in the hallway. It was on the floor, halfway between the kitchen and the bedroom. Frau Kahler said it was sitting upright. The handle was pointed toward the front door, she said. I think it was coming out. I stayed in Berlin for 2 more weeks. Mrs. Banerjee sent a man to pack my things from the flat. He did it in the middle of the day, quickly, with the windows open. He told me afterward, when he delivered my suitcases to the hotel, that the flat had felt ordinary to him. Just a nice old flat. He said he had seen the teapot. He said it had been back on the top shelf when he arrived. He said someone must have put it there, although Frau Kahler had not gone inside, and Mrs. Banerjee had not been in Berlin, and no one else had a key. I did not ask him to guess who had put it back. I moved to Amsterdam in March. I have a small apartment near the Oosterpark. It is cheaper than Berlin and friendlier than New Ulm. And my translation work is steadier, and I am on the whole better than I was. But I want to tell you something, because this is the part I think about, and because this is the part one have not told anyone else. When I moved into the Amsterdam apartment, I unpacked my suitcases. I did not remember packing anything unusual. The man who had packed my things for me in Berlin had been efficient and had texted me a list of everything he had put in each bag. At the bottom of my second suitcase, wrapped in one of my own sweaters, I found a small brown earthenware teapot, the color of wet bark, a chip on the lid. I stood in my new kitchen and I held it in my hands for a long time. It was warm. It was about the temperature a teapot would be if a hand had just set it down. I called Mrs. Banerjee the next morning. I told her what I had found. I described it. I asked her if it was possible that the man she had sent had accidentally packed it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Mr. Harlan, the teapot is on my shelf. I asked the man to bring it to London when he had finished with your things. It has been in my flat in Hampstead for 3 weeks. It has not moved, I said. Then what do I have? She said, I don't know. I said, what should I do with it? She said, I don't know that either. I would not throw it away. I would not break it. I would not open it. I would put it somewhere high, and I would leave it alone, and I would pay attention to the flat you are living in now, because I think something has decided to come with you. And I think it will tell you, in small ways, what it wants. I put it on the top shelf of my kitchen, in the corner, behind a row of glass jars that I bought at a flea market on the Noordermarkt for exactly that purpose. I have lived in Amsterdam now for 8 months. I am writing this in October, almost exactly a year after I first moved into the Schneeberg flat. The teapot has not moved. Not yet, but I notice things. My kitchen window some mornings is harder to open than other mornings. My kettle sometimes boils without whistling. The lamp in my living room, twice now, has turned itself off when I was sure I had left it on. My bedroom door, one night last month, was open when I woke up, even though I had closed it. I have started keeping a notebook by the front door, on a shelf under a mirror. I write in it every night before I sleep. I write about what I did that day, and what I noticed, and what I intend to do tomorrow. The entries are small and domestic and kind. I am trying to write them the way Arun wrote his. I do not know if what I brought with me is the flat, or something the flat had been keeping, or something that simply found me in a bag one day and decided I was the next notebook. I do not know what it wants. I do not know if it is frightened or patient or pleased. I know only that I am paying attention, the way Mrs. Banerjee told me to pay attention, the way Arun paid attention for 30 years, the way Matthias did not. Know that attention is the rent. I know that if the teapot ever moves, I will call Mrs. Banerjee immediately, and I will leave within the hour, and I will not stop to pack, and I will not look back at the kitchen on my way out the door. I know that I will keep paying the rent for as long as the rent is small, and I know in a way I try not to think about most nights, that there will probably come a morning, eventually, when I walk into my kitchen and the teapot will be on the counter, handle out, the chip of the lid facing the doorway. And on that morning I will have to decide whether I am Arun, who sat with it for an hour, or Matthias, who did not call in time, or the man I was in Berlin, who walked down the stairs and found the woman in 2B and was allowed, because he listened, to leave. I hope I am the last one. I am not sure yet. Some nights, when the wind comes off the canal and my radiator clicks, I go into the kitchen and I stand in the doorway, and I do not look at the top shelf, and I listen. The flat is quiet. The teapot is still. The notebook is full of small kind sentences. For now that is enough. For now I am paying attention.